It stops us from having to look at it, the fact that it's this system that we live in, where we are now at a point where global debt is $244 trillion. Well, who do we owe the money to? Who does each government, who does each country owe the money to? Oh, well, private bankers. Okay, well, how did private bankers get into this situation where they're able to control the flow of money into society with debt attached to it, so that from the get-go, the government is in debt, thus the banks are in debt, thus the people are in debt? That sounds like slavery to me. That sounds like from the get-go of how money enters into our society, we're enslaved. Well, how do these private bankers, why are they in that situation? Oh, okay, well, now you start following where these private bankers, who they are, what families they are, how many forgot the name for a 100-year cycle, centuries they've been in power for. And you start looking at that, and then you look at where their influence is, what industries they help to control, how they sort of have different people in different positions that are allowing for an overall systematic control. You can't have a conversation about politics, about business, about this kind of stuff. You can't have a conversation about it without talking about the elephant in the room. I get very sort of like I watch, for example, I'm not calling him out in any sort of negative way here, but we often watch a lot of the big thinkers of today, like Jordan Peterson, who I do like. I like his work a lot. We talk about Ben Shapiro as well, big thinker, very intelligent dude. But there's no conversation of the bigger underlying issue, the elephant in the room, as to why society is the way it is partly. There's no conversation about that. It's back to that little politics box. Oh, it needs to all fit within this box. Well, let's just talk about this. Let's just talk about this. Every time a new idea is presented, I was watching an interview with Andrew Yang. I'm going to double check the name. Andrew Yang, guy running for president. Asian man in the United States running for president. Yeah, Andrew Yang. He's an American entrepreneur. Look him up. He says a lot of interesting things. I haven't seen everything he said, so I'm not sure if I agree with everything he says, so I'm just going to come out and say that. But I've listened to him say a number of very interesting things. And I'm thinking to myself, so every time he brings something forward, all the questions are, well, how is that going to fit into our system? Well, how are you going to have universal basic income, and what's going to happen over here? And then how's that going to affect this over here? And then some of his underlying ideas are, I want people via universal basic income, $1,000. You opt in if you want it, or you just don't want it, no big deal. So he brings this forward and he says, yeah, I think it's important as an underlying idea that people are, the example he used is you get the boot off their neck, so they're not like, oh my God, I can't live my life. You get the boot off their neck, which is debt and financial and slavery. And you say, here's a little bit of money. And how is this going to create a healthier society, a better society that allows for this, that, whatever? Sure, we're still talking within the confines of our current system, but how does this start to create a better society? And everyone's like, oh, well, who's going to pay for that? And what's going to happen? And blah, blah, blah. This is a bad idea because of this. People aren't going to work. People aren't going to do this. People aren't going to do that. And we come up with all these reasons that we don't know yet. And yes, there's been testing for different various aspects of universal basic income. And we always find different reasons for why we could support it or why we can't support it. And we relate it to the system at hand. And what we start to understand is that there's multi-factors involved in almost every of these situations, which we're going to get to as one of our final points here. But bring up this idea, let's get the boot off people's neck, and all of a sudden you realize, what is his ultimate goal? He wants people to be more inclined to do what they love or to do things that they're highly interested in without constantly being fearful of whether or not they can survive. Well, why is he saying this? Because it represents every single human being on this planet. Everybody. If you were to take 1,000 people, guide them through a 5-10 minute meditation where they just detach from the world as it is today for a moment. Detach from everything they feel and how it all needs to be. All the different, it all has to be like this. You detach them from this little tiny box that we live in. And then you say, okay, now imagine for a second, you get to do something that you're really inclined to do, that you really, really want to do. What does that look like? What are you doing? how often would you want to do that, and so forth, right? Okay, well now I'm potentially doing this for, a couple days a week, and 5, 6 hours, 7, maybe 8, maybe 12 if I get really into it that day, right? Okay, so you start to realize that in a lot of cases, every single person at their deepest core would totally enjoy and totally love living and doing what they wish to do, and would easily work within a system where if we could find out a way through automation, through shared tasks, through micro communities existing within larger communities and larger communities, we could create sustenance without the need for exchange constantly. And I could do more of the things that I wish to do, and don't think about it in terms of the world today, right? That's why we did the meditation. You first have to pull yourself out of this for a second. You realize that this is at our core. This is how we want to live. We want to be in a state where we're not enslaved by money, because we know it's possible, right? We've been convinced it's not, but we know it's possible. Now you come back here for a second, you say, okay, we got two different worlds. Now that we know this is possible, how do we move from this world to that world? What is it going to take? Well, what we're doing right now is we're saying, as a utopia, this is crazy, let's come back to this world, and it all has to exist within this tiny little confines. So every time a person like Andrew Yang comes forth with this idea for, hey, we can do this where, we can live in a way where, maybe we're doing what we love a little more. Small idea. That's socialism. That's a problem. It sounds like we're moving into communism now. Oh my God, we have all these terms to deflect these ideas. And then we have all these questions that try and fit it into the confines of this tiny little baby box. The note I had for today's show was, we're trying to fit a ton of great ideas into a tiny box. Why are we doing that? When are we going to have the discussion about the elephant in the room? That is, we exist within a system that does not allow us to thrive. When are we going to stop doing the mental gymnastics that we watch on a lot of these prominent internet TV shows now, where it's like, oh, well, this system here and that system, okay, well this, and then how are we going to do that? And then, okay, so if you're going to pay people with this, that's going to cost $1.2 trillion, so then where are you going to get that money from? And then where are you going to get this? And, the world's in $244 trillion worth of debt, and blah, blah, blah. Do you enjoy that? Is that fun? Is that fun to listen to? Is that fun to try and deconstruct all the little ideas of how we're going to take these great ideas and try and fit them into the system, realizing we can't, so then we throw out these ideas and then we just come back to, okay, well, we'll just keep living as it is. Shouldn't the people with great ideas, isn't that a sign that perhaps humanity as a whole is trying to evolve, is trying to move forward, and that this is more about this idea that, I've said a number of times and been talking about for years, which is when we move out of the mode, and we could start at the country level if we really want. But when we move out of the mode of stopping the conversation of we have to fit everything into this tiny system we have today, and it's true, right? We try and fit everything into this tiny system. When we move out of that mode and into a mode where we're going to say, okay, for a second, let's let go of what we think how it all has to be. And I know, I can hear you as you're watching this. You're finding all these reasons as to why this could never be, as to why no one would ever change, as to why no system would ever allow this, as all these powerful people, and this is one of the illusions, all these powerful people that wear the suits, that walk around, that do things like that, we don't even connect with them as being humans. And that's the illusion. We look at them through this little box, like you're looking at me, but we look at them through this little box, and we make it out to be as if they're just a non-human being that is going about doing it. They're larger than life, and they're huge, and whatever, for them to get in that position must mean they're like insanely brilliant, insanely intelligent, and all the people around them are all insanely intelligent. And they're saying things that I don't quite understand, and that are like kind of complicated, and I can't wrap my head around some of this stuff. Therefore, I'm just going to leave it to them, because they're probably right. And we're never really going to think outside of what they're saying. We see them as like, yeah, these are the people that make the decisions. But the reality of the situation is, and I've learned this a lot over my years as I went from starting this company when I was in my early 20s and now being almost 32 years old and having met a ton of very prominent figures from around the world and being like, some of these people that I thought were like insanely brilliant, they're an average person that's similar to myself. Or in some cases, I'm like, they were amazed by things I said, right? And vice versa. It happens all over the place with that. So you start to realize like, well, my ideas are valuable. What I believe, what I connect with is valuable. And if I think, anybody watching this, that we can live in a world where we don't have to be enslaved by $244 trillion of debt that's just owed to a private corporation that has designed this system to enslave the population through money and finance, then we can probably live in a world like that. Because the reality of the situation is, tons of people are thinking this, but it just keeps getting squashed. And all of the important conversations, they just revert back to, how are we going to fit it into this tiny little box? And we keep bigging up these intellects and these thinkers. Again, there's a purpose to them. I truly believe that a lot of these people that are popular today are helping humanity think a little bit more deeply about issues, get out of the crazy emotional, like, it's all about racism, it's all about gender inequality, these are pieces. And most of what people call evidence to these things is not even true to begin with. So these guys are out there helping people, and there's women out there doing it too, helping people become more grounded in looking at their world. And I like to view our work as, all right, now let's blow the doors off and say, what do we really want to do? How do we really want to move forward? And then it's going to start with conversations. It's going to start with giving ourselves the permission to look at some of the headlines we talked about today. Drop the bullshit analytics and start looking at, why does this actually happen? What aspect of humanity's consciousness actually does this? When are we going to admit we live within a destructive nature? When I say nature, I don't mean human nature. This is how it is. Nature, in the sense of this is our way of being right now, is a destructive state of consciousness, state of being, that is just continually reinforced by the system at hand. We think we're solving issues by looking at this thing called CO2 that apparently is, once we tax people, we're going to save everything. But we're not going to address the elephant in the room, which is that there's this gigantic issue with the system at hand that makes it impossible for us to actually bring forth any of these incredible ideas, because all the people that are invested in it, mentally, emotionally, physically, and financially, are not willing to let it go. And then they convince us as to why we need to hold on to all this stuff exactly as it is, even though it doesn't feel good for everybody, even though there's billions of people that are starving, that don't have food, that don't have shelter, that don't have basic needs. And I'm not saying it's the responsibility of you have a responsibility to take care of everybody. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, do you want to play the game like this anymore? And if not, when push comes to shove, are you willing to take a step out of it?